He gripped the microphone like it was an extension of his own swagger. Sweat still clung to his shoulders, glistening under the harsh floodlights that washed the ring in pale white. The crowd of thousands in Houston roared, their voices ricocheting against the steel rafters of the arena. He'd just pinned his opponent in the center of the mat, a showy slam punctuated by the 3 count that had sent his name echoing across the PA system. The music faded. The referee had raised his arm in victory, and now the young wrestler stood alone, pacing the squared circle like a lion circling his cage. The chants rumbled from the stands, half cheers, half jeers, the kind of noise that feeds a performer's ego. He soaked it up, raising a finger to his lips in mock silence, then shouting, "You see that? That's dominance! That's what real power looks like." His voice rattled through the speakers, cracking the line between scripted theater and raw arrogance. At first, it seemed like the usual trash talk, the kind fans expected. But then he stopped in the center of the ring, shoulders heaving, and smirked toward the cameras lined up ringside. The grin had that dangerous edge, the kind that suggests he'd thought of something bigger, something reckless. "Everybody keeps talking about legends," he said, his words dragging, daring the room to follow. "Everybody whispers names of guys who don't even step in the ring anymore. They want to keep the ghosts alive." He spat on the mat for emphasis. "You know who I'm talking about. That cowboy. That karate guy. Chuck Norris." The reaction was instant. A ripple shot through the building, like the air itself had been slapped. Some people laughed, others booed sharply. Phones lit up like stars across the darkened upper decks as people tweeted, streamed, recorded. He smelled the moment and leaned into it. "Chuck Norris?" he repeated, drawing out the syllables with theatrical scorn. "That old man couldn't last 5 seconds in here with me. 5 seconds. I'd fold him in half before the bell even echoed." He flexed, exaggeratedly, the veins in his arms popping under the lights, feeding off the nervous energy that rolled back at him. The crowd fractured, half exploding in laughter, half in outrage. Older fans shook their heads, some shouting curses, while younger voices cheered his audacity. The tension made the ring feel smaller, tighter, as though his words were dragging everyone closer to the center. Reporters stationed by the barricades leaned forward, scribbling faster. One of them, a veteran in a worn blazer, couldn't resist shouting a question. "Are you serious? You're calling out Norris?" The wrestler barked a laugh, bending at the waist as though the absurdity amused him. "Serious?" he shouted back. "I'm dead serious. If he has the guts, if he has 1 ounce of fight left in those tired bones, let him walk down that ramp right now. Let him prove me wrong." The arena erupted again, half disbelief, half anticipation. Fans pointed toward the entryway, craning their necks like something might already be happening. But the ramp stayed empty, bathed only in colored lights and shadows. He stalked the ropes, gripping them with sweaty hands, shouting into the void, "Where is he?" "Come on. This is Texas, isn't it? His backyard. If Norris is a real man, if he's not just a dusty myth in a bad joke, he'll step out here tonight." For a moment, the show wasn't a show anymore. The crowd wasn't sure if they were watching a script unfold or witnessing a line being crossed. The hush that followed his words carried a weight the PA system couldn't mask. People muttered to each other in the aisles. Some laughed nervously. Others tapped their phones furiously to see if the internet was already exploding with the clip. The wrestler sensed hesitation, and that made him double down. He lifted the mic again, voice dropping into a low, growling taunt. "But you know what?" He paused, scanning the audience like a predator sniffing blood. "He won't come. Because deep down, Legends don't fight. They hide. They stay in the past because the present would chew them up. He slammed the mic against his chest with a hollow thud, then pointed to the entrance again. So here's your truth. If Norris is here tonight, let him walk out. If he doesn't, then every one of you knows. He's scared, and I'm the man who killed the myth. The last words hit like a hammer. Boos rained down from the upper decks, mixed with cheers from younger fans thrilled by the chaos. Security guards along the barricades exchanged glances, uneasy. In the cheap seats, someone started a chant. "NORRIS! NORRRIS! Exclamation mark. It caught, spreading like fire, drowning out even the booming bass of the sound system. He laughed again, strutting around the ring as though the noise belonged to him, but the chant grew louder, more unified, rising until the rafters shook. Even those who hadn't come tonight for legends, even those who'd never seen Norris fight, felt the weight of a line crossed. The wrestler spread his arms wide, basking in the storm he'd created. See? They want him. But he's not here. He won't show. And that means I just won the easiest fight of my life. But as the chant thundered on, there was a flicker in his eyes, something small, almost imperceptible. A recognition that the crowd wasn't laughing with him anymore. They were waiting. They were daring fate to prove him wrong. And deep down, though he'd never admit it, he knew that if those doors opened, and that man really did appear, nothing in his carefully rehearsed bravado would matter anymore. Just wondering, where are you watching from? Write it down, bellow. The wrestler had expected noise, had counted on it. Noise was the air he breathed, the fuel that made his grin feel natural and his chest bigger than it was. But after his taunt, after that ugly dare into the microphone, the noise turned different. It wasn't a wall of cheering anymore. It was restless, uneven, alive in the way a storm is alive. People in the upper decks shifted in their seats, craning toward the entrance ramp. In the cheaper rows, fans stood on tiptoes, phones high, like the very act of filming could force a miracle out of the dark. He prowled the ring, boots thudding on canvas, hands gesturing like a carnival barker. "See?" he shouted, pointing at the tunnel. "Empty. No heroes left. Legends know when to stay home." His voice echoed through the PA, but the laughter that followed was thin, like a sound effect in a movie that the audience had stopped believing in. Seconds stretched. 15. 20. The crowd's energy began to split. Boos from one side, chants from the other, and underneath it all an uneasy buzz, like a swarm of bees pressed against glass. On the concourse, lines at the beer stands froze as heads tilted toward the screens. Even the ushers, supposed to be stone-faced, kept glancing at the ramp as though they were audience members now too. Then, without warning, the world went black. Not a dim, not a fade, gone. The jumbo screens blinked out. The LED boards died. Even the rumble of canned entrance music was cut mid-beat. Thousands of voices gasped in unison, like a lung punched empty. Only the thin green glow of the exit signs remained, painting the arena in a strange emergency hue. For a heartbeat, it was total silence, the kind that makes people feel suddenly small, suddenly aware of their own breathing. A single light returned. It wasn't pyro, it wasn't a flood. It was one narrow spotlight, cold and white, falling at the top of the ramp. Dust drifted lazily in its beam. The tunnel itself stayed black, a mouth waiting to exhale. The hush thickened. You could hear coughs in the upper deck, the clatter of a dropped cup rolling under a seat, the squeak of a sneaker on concrete. Then a figure stepped into the light. He didn't burst out. He walked. No music, no graphics, no fireworks, just steady footsteps carrying him into the beam. The crowd needed a second to process because nobody had truly believed it would happen. But the outline was unmistakable. Broad shoulders, simple dark jacket, stride unhurried. Chuck Norris. For a moment, disbelief held the arena hostage. And then it broke. The sound that erupted wasn't cheering so much as a physical force, a tidal wave of lungs and throats and fists pounding railings. NORRIS! N-O-R-R-I-S! Exclamation mark. It began near the floor, spread to the rafters, and within seconds the entire building was chanting in rhythm, the vibrations rattling the turnbuckles, the guardrails, the rib cages of everyone present. He didn't acknowledge it. No smile, no wave. His eyes stayed fixed on the ring, on the man pacing like a trapped animal inside. Every step he took was deliberate. Heel, then toe, a rhythm older than the stage he now occupied. Camera operators scrambled to keep him in frame, but half of them forgot to look through their lenses, stunned like the fans they were supposed to film. Children clapped out of rhythm. Parents stared without blinking. Security guards pressed earpieces tighter, as if they might be told what to do next. They weren't. The moment belonged to no one but him. By the time Chuck reached the base of the ramp, the wrestler's bravado was already fraying. The grin was still on his face, but it clung there like paint over a crack. He lifted his mic with a shaky thumb, forcing volume into his throat. "Took you long enough," he sneered. The words hit the air and fell flat, drowned before they traveled 3 rows. Chuck climbed the steel steps. Each footfall rang like a bell, clear even over the chant. He took the outside of the post, one hand brushing the rope, sliding between them without haste. Inside the ring, the canvas shivered beneath the weight of 2 different worlds finally colliding. The referee slipped in, as if summoned by instinct. He looked nervous, eyes darting between them, one hand already half raised in preparation for a signal he wasn't sure he wanted to give. A stagehand on the floor held out a spare microphone, both hands extended as though offering something sacred. Chuck ignored it. He didn't need it. He stood just inside the ropes, half turned toward the crowd, half turned toward the wrestler who had spent the last 10 minutes writing checks his body couldn't possibly cash. And in that silence, because yes, the crowd had quieted again, as though desperate not to miss a word, the only sound was the uneven breath of the man who had invited him. The wrestler forced a laugh. "Granddad found the ramp," he quipped, teeth flashing. But there was no echo of laughter, no applause. The line collapsed under its own weight. Chuck finally moved, 1 step forward, no more. The chant roared back, deafening now, like the building itself wanted to push him into the center. He didn't smile, didn't blink. He just nodded once, small and sharp, and suddenly it felt like an answer to every question that had been hanging in the air. The referee turned to the timekeeper, palm up. His voice cracked as he barked the only word he could. "Ring it!" And the arena inhaled again, bracing for what was no longer a show. When Chuck stepped between the ropes, something shifted. The roar of thousands dimmed, as though a heavy curtain fell across the arena. Phones still glowed, hands still waved, but the sound was different now. Not silence exactly, rather the low hum of anticipation that pressed down on everyone at once. In the ring, under the lights, it felt like standing inside a glass dome where every movement echoed twice as loud. The wrestler, still pacing along the ropes, fought to keep his grin alive. He'd strutted across this canvas 100 times, basked in cameras, in chants, in jeers that he could twist into fuel. But this wasn't the same stage anymore. His boots tapped nervously against the mat. He tugged at his wrist tape, though it was already snug, then adjusted the waist of his trunks as though a loose seam could explain why his pulse raced. His eyes flicked to the crowd, searching for support, and found too many faces just watching, waiting. He forced his voice into the microphone, a laugh pitched too high. "Well, would you look at this?" he shouted, sweeping an arm across the arena. "Grandpa's finally wandered out of the rocking chair. You ready to bow before me, old man?" The words fell heavy, bouncing into the rafters and collapsing on themselves. A few voices laughed out of habit, but they didn't last. The sound of disapproval swelled louder, and then there was only a strange, expectant quiet. Chuck didn't answer. He didn't even glance at the mic a stagehand had lifted between the ropes. He stood with his feet set shoulder width, breathing slowly, his hands loose at his sides. Not clenched, not ready to pounce, just steady, like stone left too long to shift. The wrestler found himself staring at the man's eyes, at the stillness that lived there. There was no mockery, no fear, just something impossible to unnerve. That absence of reaction was worse than any insult. The wrestler's own grin faltered. He lifted the mic again, louder this time. "This is your backyard, huh? Texas. You gonna bend the knee before I make you?" His words cracked in the middle, and the audience caught it. A ripple of murmurs passed through the lower rows, a restless tide that made him feel smaller with each second. Then Chuck moved. Just one step forward, measured, deliberate. The air itself seemed to tighten around him. The wrestler tried not to flinch, but his shoulders twitched all the same. Up close, he saw what the cameras never caught. The stillness of muscles trained not to waste motion, the eyes that scanned without blinking. He felt his own breath go shallow, the way it does when you realize you're not setting the tempo anymore. Without warning, Chuck reached forward. The wrestler thought, for a split second, it was a strike. But Chuck's hand only closed around the microphone the younger man was holding. He didn't snatch it. He took it, smooth, as if it had been meant for him all along. The transfer was silent, seamless, and, in its simplicity, devastating. Chuck lifted the mic just enough. His voice carried, not raised, but clean. "I didn't come here to laugh," he said, every syllable sharp in the quiet. "I came to see if you can stand by your own words." The crowd erupted, not in wild cheers, but in something weightier. A collective exhale, a thunder of approval that rolled around the arena and back into the ring. People set their phones down, wanting to witness it with their own eyes. The wrestler's chest tightened. He reached reflexively for the mic, but Chuck didn't release it. For a moment, their fingers brushed, and the younger man felt the firmness of that grip. A calm refusal, not forceful, but immovable. He laughed again, but it came out hollow. "You think this is some kind of museum? You want proof? You're looking at it." He pointed at his chest, trying to summon confidence. His hand trembled at the end of the gesture, and he quickly scratched his jaw to cover it. Chuck's head tilted slightly, a small adjustment that felt like evaluation, not acknowledgement. The wrestler shifted his stance, boots squeaking. Every sound, the creak of the turnbuckle, the shuffle of the referee's shoes, suddenly felt amplified. "Say the word!" the wrestler barked, as much to himself as to anyone else. "Say when." The referee, who had been hovering at a distance, finally stepped in, his hand raised. His eyes flicked from Chuck to the younger man, reading the storm before it broke. The timekeeper at ringside tightened his grip on the hammer, eyes wide, ready. The air inside the building felt heavier than heat, charged like before lightning. Chuck lifted the microphone one last time. I don't need you on your knees, he said calmly. Just on your feet. The arena erupted. This time it was thunder, a wall of sound that crashed over the ring. Chants rose, "Norris, Norris," steady, relentless, a rhythm that shook the canvas beneath them. The wrestler swallowed hard. His chest heaved. He spat to the side, the string catching the light before vanishing into the mat. He muttered something too low for even himself to hear. Chuck handed the mic to the referee. Not thrown, not dropped. Placed like a tool no longer required. He stepped back half a pace and planted his feet, a stance chosen with the certainty of a man who had already accepted the truth of the next moment. The referee's eyes darted again. Then he gave the smallest nod to the timekeeper. The hammer lifted. The crowd collectively inhaled. And in that suspended breath, everyone understood. The stage lights, the cameras, the scripts, they were gone. What stood in the ring now was no performance. This was real. The bells still hung in the rafters, its echo fading into the roar when the younger man exploded forward. He didn't test, didn't circle, didn't measure. He lunged as if the whole arena existed to prove his boast. His arms swung wide, loud, designed for noise and spectacle. The soles of his boots squealed against canvas, every stomp a desperate signature. Look at me. I'm in control. But Chuck was already gone. A half step, no more, yet perfectly timed. He wasn't rushing, wasn't straining. He shifted like a shadow leaving a wall. The wrestler's grip closed on empty space, and in that emptiness, his own momentum betrayed him. He turned, red in the face, more humiliated than tired. The crowd screamed. Some chanted his name, others jeered. And then the voices began to fragment, uncertainty creeping into the sound. People expected fireworks. What they got was a rhythm too subtle to follow. A man who seemed to know the strike before it was thrown. "Fight like a man!" the wrestler bellowed, chest heaving, words cracking the mic even without power behind it. He shoved his shoulder into Chuck's sternum, expecting collapse. Instead, he felt a body that bent a fraction, then refused to bend more. Chuck said nothing. His silence was louder than the insults raining from the younger man's mouth. He moved only enough to prevent harm, never enough to satisfy the need for spectacle. And that restraint, it stung worse than a punch. The wrestler circled again, arms whipping the air, trying to reclaim the crowd. He shouted to the front rows, "You want a show? Watch this." But the chant rising from the bleachers wasn't his name anymore. It was steady, low, patient. Norris, Norris. He lunged for a double-leg takedown. Awkward in boots, clumsy with rage, it looked more like desperation than technique. Chuck slid his hips back, framed with his forearms, and the drive died mid-step. The referee edged closer, unsure if he was supposed to intervene. He didn't. The arena wasn't watching a performance anymore. It was watching a lesson. The younger man tried again, finally clutching fabric. His fist knotted in Chuck's shirt, yanking hard, hoping for resistance. Instead, the grip evaporated in his hand. A small circle of wrist, a turn of fingers, and he was left clutching air. The crowd gasped. Chuck's face hadn't changed. "What are you waiting for?" the wrestler screamed, spit shining in the lights. His forehead nearly touched Chuck's. He demanded violence, needed it, begged for it in everything but words. Chuck's voice was calm, clear, deliberate. "I don't need to prove I'm a man to you. You need to prove it to yourself." The sentence fell like a stone in still water. The arena shifted. Phones lowered slightly. People weren't just spectators anymore. They were witnesses. The wrestler shoved both hands into Chuck's chest. Once, twice, 3 times. The ropes trembled behind him, but Chuck didn't stumble. Each shove looked smaller than the last, not because they were weaker, but because they meant less. He barked for cheers and got none. His own words dissolved into static. Panic glimmered behind his eyes, quick, sharp, undeniable. He circled again, jaw clenched so hard the muscles jumped, arms shaking. Chuck lifted one hand, palm open. The building obeyed, without knowing why. The roar dropped to a hush, ropes creaking suddenly loud, someone coughing in the upper deck, echoing like a gunshot. Even the wrestler froze at the weight of it. "Enough games," Chuck said. No shout, no bark, just steel. "Now it's your choice. Stop or fall." The words sliced cleaner than any strike. The chant came back in waves, heavier, tidal. "NORRIS! NORRIS!" The wrestler looked around, at the ropes that couldn't save him, at the hard camera that had nothing left to script, at the sea of faces no longer laughing. He had only one direction left. Forward. Pride doesn't retreat. So he dropped his level, charged with everything left, arms clawing for control. The ring seemed to tilt with him, the crowd surging to its feet. Everyone knew the next moment would decide how the night would be remembered, whether as another piece of theater or the instant a boast turned into a reckoning. The wrestler didn't slow down. Pride had stripped him of calculation, left only the blunt force of a man who refused to back away. He thundered across the canvas, his body flung forward by anger more than technique. For a heartbeat, the arena believed he might actually topple the legend, because desperation can look like power when wrapped in noise. But then the collision never came. Chuck shifted half a foot, one precise angle, and the wrestler's charge collapsed into nothing. His chest slammed against the ropes, snapping them hard enough to rattle the posts. The crowd groaned in unison. He turned, wild-eyed, cheeks flushed scarlet, and saw Chuck still in the center, breathing evenly, not even raising his fists. A man that calm was unbearable to fight. Every second of stillness mocked the frantic storm of limbs. The wrestler stomped his boots, arms wide, demanding noise, demanding validation. "He won't fight me!" he shouted. His voice cracked, the microphone of the arena catching every shred of panic. The crowd didn't buy it. They'd seen enough. Chuck hadn't struck yet, but he'd already carved the rhythm. Each silence, each pause, was a reminder that the fight existed on his terms. The wrestler lunged again. Hooks, elbows, knees, clumsy from rage. Chuck's body shifted only enough to keep distance. When a strike brushed close, his hand guided it away like he was moving furniture. Nothing dramatic, just the smallest corrections, each one a lesson. The crowd began to change. Where minutes before they screamed for blood, now they murmured in awe, the sound of discovery. Even the commentators fell quiet, words running dry. The spectacle had turned into something rawer, harder to explain. One man dismantling another without ever raising his voice. The wrestler bared his teeth, spit flying, his shoulders heaving with the weight of exhaustion. "Stand still!" he barked. "Take the hit!" But his tone had shifted. It sounded like begging. Chuck finally spoke. "You don't want me to stand still. Trust me." The words crawled through the silence like a warning no one wanted to hear twice. Phones in the crowd caught the moment. Thousands of tiny screens glowing. Everyone wanted proof that they'd witnessed it, the second the legend took control with nothing but calm. Another surge. The wrestler hooked low, then high. Chuck parried one, slipped the other, and let the man stumble forward under his own momentum. The sound of the miss, the empty swoosh of air, drew louder gasps than a landed blow could have. The wrestler spun, chest heaving, sweat dripping into his eyes. He was younger, heavier, stronger in muscle, but every move drained him. He looked across the ring and saw a man who hadn't broken rhythm once. That sight cracked something deeper than bone. Certainty. The chants grew heavier now. N-O-R-R-I-S. N-O-R-R-I-S. It wasn't just support, it was judgment. The arena had chosen. Red-faced, the wrestler charged again, leaping into a move rehearsed 100 times in training, his signature slam. But this time, the hands he expected to seize were no longer there. Chuck shifted, caught a wrist, rotated his hips. In less than a blink, the younger man sprawled on the mat, breath driven from his lungs. It wasn't violent, it wasn't flashy, but it was absolute. The crowd erupted, the sound slamming the walls like thunder. Camera lenses snapped, commentators screamed half-sentences, fans leapt from seats. The wrestler rolled to his knees, coughing, humiliation mixing with pain. He stared up at Chuck, who hadn't even adjusted his stance. The legend simply waited, gaze steady, daring him to rise. And he did. Pride wouldn't let him stay down. He stumbled upright, fists shaking, a guttural roar tearing from his throat. He threw himself forward once more, the final scraps of will bundled into one reckless storm. Chuck raised his hand. Not for a strike, not yet, but for silence. The noise of the arena thinned, drawn into the gesture like air into a vacuum. Even the wrestler faltered for half a breath, caught in the weight of that command. "Enough," Chuck said, voice cutting sharper than steel. "You've proved what happens when strength is loud. Now you'll learn what happens when strength is quiet." The crowd howled, some in awe, some in fear of what might follow. The wrestler, trembling with rage, had only two options left: surrender or throw himself into the abyss one last time. And everyone in the building knew which one he'd choose. The wrestler's scream split the air as he hurled himself forward one last time. His body was a cannonball of rage and shame, fueled not by strategy, but by the unbearable weight of thousands of eyes. Boots slammed the mat like thunder, arms swinging wide, every tendon straining for a strike that could erase humiliation. But humiliation cannot be erased by noise. Chuck didn't flinch. He didn't even step back. He shifted just enough, half a breath, half a thought, and the young man's fury cut through empty space. A forearm meant to crush glanced at nothing. A knee aimed to shatter collapsed into air. The wrestler's momentum betrayed him, his own force dragging him downward. Then it happened. One movement. Simple, precise, final. Chuck's hand locked on the wrist, a turn of the hips, a guiding pressure, and the wrestler's body met the canvas with a sound that cracked louder than any microphone could catch. Not brutal, not bone-breaking, controlled. Perfect. The arena froze. For the length of a heartbeat, there was no sound, only the echo of that fall reverberating in everyone's chest. Then came the eruption. People screamed, leapt to their feet, phones raised high to capture the instant they knew would replay on highlight reels forever. The wrestler lay flat, gasping, eyes wide at the ceiling. Pride had left him. Words had left him. All that remained was the raw disbelief of a man who had promised dominance and found only silence. Chuck stepped closer. No celebration, no raised fists, no taunt. He crouched, one hand resting lightly on the shoulder of the man who minutes before had mocked him into the microphone. The cameras zoomed, desperate to catch every syllable. He spoke softly. So softly that only those closest would hear, yet the silence in the arena carried his words farther than a shout could have. "Strength isn't about putting someone down," he said. "It's about choosing not to. Remember that." The wrestler's lips trembled. He nodded once, barely, as if conceding to something far greater than the man crouched above him. Chuck stood, offered him a hand, and pulled him to his feet. The crowd roared louder than before, not because of the fall, but because of the mercy. They had come for violence and spectacle, but what they witnessed cut deeper. Control, restraint, the unshakable command of a man who didn't need victory to prove himself. Commentators tried to put words to it. Legend, unbelievable, historic. But none of them captured the truth of the moment. The arena wasn't cheering a knockout. They were cheering a lesson. The wrestler slumped against the ropes, head bowed, sweat dripping like confession. He couldn't meet the eyes of the thousands watching. He couldn't meet Chuck's either. But Chuck didn't demand it. He simply turned toward the crowd, gave a single nod, and walked away. No raised arms, no theatrics. Just the quiet stride of a man finished with what he came to do. And in that quiet, the crowd found itself louder than ever, stomping, clapping, chanting his name until the sound shook the rafters. N-O-R-R-I-S. N-O-R-R-I-S. Backstage later, journalists would beg for interviews. Promoters would argue over rights. Clips would flood the internet, dissected frame by frame. But none of it would ever capture the weight of that silence, the silence that hung after Chuck's last words, after his last move. The wrestler had come into the ring with laughter. He left it with something else carved into him, a lesson that would outlast bruises, a wound of the ego that would sting far longer than any punch. And as the crowd finally began to spill into the night, still buzzing, still replaying what they'd seen, one question lingered heavier than any answer. If this was what Chuck Norris could do without even trying to win, what would happen if he truly chose to fight?